housing in California has become very expensive, so much so that the traditional model of everyone in the family owning their own separate home has unfortunately become less and less realistic. So, because of these economic factors, today on the podcast, we are going to be discussing multi generational living, not just as a reaction to these high costs, but as an intentional design strategy so that you can create privacy, flexibility, and long term value on your property. So, Sean, I know you've been working on several multi generational living projects. What are you seeing with clients who are exploring these multi generational options?
Yeah, well, good morning, Billy. Thanks for setting this up again. You use the term reaction, and I think that kind of sets the stage for exactly what we're seeing here. One way to look at this is the building department, or in this case with ADUs, the state establishes the rules of the game. But then the strategy that you play the game is more of a function of what the market allows. So when ADUs became a thing about 5 years ago, of course, driven by the state, I think the intent was for people to build ADUs that would be used for rent, and then people would be renting these to people outside of their family. I think that was ultimately the goal. But because of the way the market economics have shifted, with construction costs being high right now and interest rates still being high, I think the ADU now becomes the perfect solution for multi generational living. And I think the general public has picked up on this because we've seen a few more clients come in the door asking for this. In fact, I think the first client who asked for this was about 3 years ago, right about that tipping point where you started to see interest rates spike. So I think for a lot of this conversation, it might be interesting to use you as an example. At some point, Billy, you'd probably like to get into the housing market. I know you're in Colorado, which also has a challenging market. Maybe for the sake of this conversation, we can use you as an example if you were trying to get into a home in Southern California.
Okay, so I'll be the 28-year-old older. I think I'm actually Gen Z, technically. So I'm like the oldest possible Gen Z. So that makes sense. Do you want to go deeper into that, or do you want to move on to the next question I had here?
Yeah, let's pause here for a minute. So let's just set the stage here. Let's say you wanted to get a home in San Diego or Los Angeles. I own a home here and I have a backyard. You would be trying to buy a home. The average cost for a home is $1 million. You might be lucky enough to find something around 600,000, maybe $700,000, but it doesn't get too much cheaper than that out here, to be honest with you. Your generation, unless you're, incredibly wealthy or inherit some money or have a very, very high paying job, you're essentially priced out of the real estate market here in Southern California. But here I am with a large backyard, and we have about 70 by 25 feet of buildable area. So it would actually be more cost effective for you to invest in a new home in my backyard. And then at the conclusion of the project, it would be the same exact situation as if we both had homes on smaller lots. Okay, let's just do some math here. Let's say we were going to build market rate right now for rental property. That'd be about $400 a square foot. And if we were to build you something that was like a 2 bedroom, 1.5 bath, which would be a pretty nice starter home, that'd be about 750 square feet. So you're talking about $300,000 to get in that type of home versus probably closer to $600 or $700,000 to buy that type of home. It's like a 50% discount if I'm willing to give up some of this land and make an accommodation for you to live here. Now, this works perfectly not only just for family, but also for friends too. And that was the first instance I saw of a client saying, "Hey, I'm going to have my best friends move into my lot and we're going to build a new ADU for them." So, do you see the major advantage here because of that high cost of housing?
I do. Well, essentially, you're getting rid of the land cost in this scenario. So that's obviously going to have a dramatic impact. And then all you need to worry about is the construction, of course.
Right. You may have to take out a construction loan, which you may not qualify for as a 28-year-old, but it could be something that, with my name on the loan, we could probably do something like that. So all of a sudden, what was a solution for the housing crisis and maybe to increase rental properties suddenly becomes the perfect scenario for people in your generation who have friends or family that live in this area already and own homes to really become your first starter home. Now, there's probably some challenges with this. What would be Could you resell the ADU? In some scenarios, now you would be able to. So you could actually probably, depending on different criteria and what city and what zoning you have, there is now an avenue where you could own the ADU and I could own the dwelling unit. And if you decided at some point you wanted to sell the ADU, you could potentially do that, depending on some very like narrow criteria. But that is becoming an opportunity because the other scenario would be probably me as property owner would own the ADU, and then you'd either have to be added to the deed of my property, or you would essentially become just a renter, which would not really be true ownership.
Definitely. And I think it's worth just highlighting for the sake of the conversation here how I believe that the average age of a new home buyer at the time we're recording this, a first time home buyer, is now 38 years old. So, going back to like the late 90s, early 2000s, they probably would have been my age, late 20s. Now it's pushed back a decade. And I think in general, the average age of a home buyer, so all home buyers, is something like 56, 57. So that just kind of goes to show the age range of people actually buying homes in today's market. But moving on to exactly how you would fit these types of multi generational living units on a lot, can you walk us through some different scenarios in terms of how you can leverage ADUs, JADUs, all the different housing options available to actually set it up where a family can live together, albeit in separate units?
And then eventually we're going to have to get into the conversation of privacy because I know a lot of people here, oh, my in laws are going to be moving here. I need privacy. So before everybody tunes out thinking that they can't live on the same property as their in laws, we're going to get to the privacy conversation. Okay, but if you own a home in California and that home is classified as a dwelling unit, which basically all homes are, so it would exclude a condo. But if you have a dwelling unit, you could build an ADU on your property as long as you have space to do it. So this works way better if you have a backyard. It works less good if you have to build a second floor, although it still works, but it certainly complicates things. So any property that has a home can build an ADU, and then you can do this. Now, in certain scenarios, if it's a single family home, you could build an ADU detached. You could convert your garage to an ADU. So that would actually give you two ADUs plus the single family home. And then you can also build a junior accessory unit, a JADU. So that would actually give you four independent living spaces on a lot that previously had a single family home and it's zoned single family. Now, if you live in a multifamily zone and you have a single family home built, you could build a second dwelling unit, which may actually be the best angle here. But those are going to be rare cases where you're in a multifamily zone and have a single family home. But if you're in that multifamily zone, you could build a second dwelling unit and then you could build two more ADUs. So that's a way where you could, in theory, get four detached units or maybe two detached duplexes. And of course, the more detached these structures are, the more privacy everybody has. And everything I've mentioned to you now goes throughout the entire state of California. So you can do this in San Diego, where I work. You could do this in Los Angeles. You do it in San Francisco or Sacramento. And none of these require affordable housing. So it's all market rate housing.
On to the privacy concerns then. So obviously no one wants to feel like they're living on top of each other, and certainly people don't want their neighbors looking through their windows. So what are some design strategies you deploy in these types of situations so that while yes it's a tight lot with multiple people and units living on them, how can you still maintain that level of privacy people expect from a, single family home?
Yeah. And this is everybody's concern, right? Because, you don't want your parents or your in laws impeding on your private life. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. First, let's just phrase this again in the context of the cost of lots and the size of lots. So the smallest lot you can buy here with the cheapest home is probably $600,000. And this is going to be probably like a 2,000 square foot lot or less. Now, that's 1.2 million to buy two of those super inexpensive lots.
Wait, you
Now,
said so it's 600K per lot?
$600,000 will get you into the smallest home on the market, and that home is going to come with a postage stamp lot, like the smallest lot you can find with no backyard.
And
Well, if you put
what about utilities, you think? Would
well,
that
if you
include
buy
utilities?
If you no, that doesn't include utilities. But if you buy the home that's there, there's already utility hookups. But doesn't account for you to, pay the utilities every month. And we have like the highest electric per kilowatt hour in the United States right now in San Diego. It doesn't matter how you play this, like you're gonna be paying utilities. So it's almost like it's not part of the equation. But okay, so here's the setup. You buy this 600 square foot lot and you buy this 600 square foot lot, you're now 1.2 million between the two of us. I have my own lot, you have your own lot. But if you have somebody who's a friend or family who's, close enough and willing to do this, the lot that I've purchased here, I bought it in like 2022. I only paid $400,000 for this lot, and it's got all that space in the backyard. So now, instead of you buying the $600,000 tiny lot, you're going to invest $300,000 into construction, and we're going to have the same exact scenario. So the price that I paid for the lot plus the price you're going to pay for construction, we're up to $700,000, and we're not including like soft costs, but basically $700,000 instead of the $1.2 million lot situation. So bringing us back to privacy. So you're going to say, well, is it really private if we're building another unit for you in my backyard? Like, can we still maintain privacy? And the whole point of that explanation is, well, it's the same exact scenario as if we had those two smaller lots. We're just doing it at a much more cost effective way to do it. Okay, so then getting a little bit more into the weeds of privacy. First thing I would recommend is you want to detach the ADU or the dwelling unit whenever possible. If you can have two detached homes, it's far more private than if you share a wall. If the lot is big enough, there's an opportunity to do this. Now, if you build an ADU, you're going to get basically a separate electric bill. So you would pay your own electric. You'd get a separate gas bill if you have gas because it's all tied into San Diego Gas and Electric. The water bill would be shared. So we'd split it at the end of the month, or you'd pay a flat fee or something like that. And there's a new trash fee in the city of San Diego. So we'd each pay our own trash fee. The trash fee appears on the property tax. So I'd basically have to bill you for what I'm paying on the property tax. Now, if you wanted to add another family member, so you're my cousin, but let's say my parents needed a spot to live, so we're going to find another way to bring my parents here. Or sometimes maybe you have a single parent, and a single parent can be more difficult for them to make everything work financially. So that's a fairly common scenario. So now I could build a second ADU because I'm in a multifamily zone. I can build a second ADU and have that family member live in that second ADU. Now, if my lot is big enough, I can do this in 3 detached units, and that would be the most private. If another way to do this would be if I had a single family zoned lot, I can build a JADU, which has to be attached to the dwelling unit. And if I do that, then my parents could live in part of my house, which would basically become a duplex. On paper, it'd be a single because it doesn't count as another unit, but it would function like a duplex. And that would be less privacy than I would really want, but there's a clear avenue to have 3 different people here. And now, if I had a garage, which I don't, but if I did have a garage, I could convert the garage. And then if I had a deadbeat brother or something that needed a spot to live, well, he could live in the garage. And now we have 4 people that, if designed correctly, all could live much cheaper than if they all bought their own homes or rented. But it also provides an avenue for people to live in the same lot. Now, let me just dive a little deeper into privacy. So the key thing you want to consider is access. So you're going to have people accessing their units from where they park, and you're going to have people accessing their units from the sidewalk. Because if you bring a guest over, they're coming from the sidewalk. Some people have a driveway in the front. Some people have an alley in the back. If you're lucky enough, you have both, and that really creates the best opportunity here. But you're always going to have access from the sidewalk, because if you have a guest come by, they're going to come from the sidewalk. If you have a solicitor, they're coming from the sidewalk. So all the units need access from the sidewalk. And then if you have a driveway, the front unit gets access from the driveway. If you have an alley like I do, the people who park in the alley would have access from the alley. So if you have a unit in the back of the property, they access from the alley parking, but they also need a pathway from the street, from the sidewalk, where their guests would access. So the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So ideally, you want to provide one entire side yard where you can get cross access from the alley if you have it, and also from the sidewalk. That becomes the most efficient way to have this privacy. And then once you establish that path of access, you don't want your windows facing that path of access because you don't want to be chilling in your living room and then all of a sudden, my brother comes home and he's walking right past a window in your living room. That would be like an awkward scenario. But there's certainly solutions for this. If you did a 2-story ADU, would be a non-consideration. You could do frosted windows. You could do clear story windows, which are above eye line, and then you'd never notice somebody was walking. So then it comes down to kind of like the smaller details of how you design these things once you have established that path of access. So there's lots of strategies to maintain privacy even while increasing density on a property.
Totally. That makes sense. And we definitely don't want to recreate the whole living with your parents living situation just in reverse opposite stages of life. So definitely that is one reason why privacy would of course be very important. We've been talking a lot of theory and abstractly, I feel like so far. Do you have maybe an example from the portfolio of the studio we can look at to illustrate what this would mean for prospective clients considering this type of a project?
Okay, so this is a project we recently finished. This is called the Bancroft ADU and Garage. We did some cool things on this project. Since it's one of our newer finished projects, I thought this would be a good one to show you some examples. So these are some photos of the project. Let me just orientate you. Here's an existing dwelling unit. Let me see if we have a photo. Okay, so do we have a street photo? Okay, so here's the existing home. It's kind of a quasi-historic craftsman home. And behind that, we built this ADU. So I want to point out a couple things here. There is a driveway in the front, which you could see in this rendering. So the person who is my client, who lives in the front house, they access their property through the driveway in the front. And the front door is like kind of right over here. Let me see if I have a better image of this. Okay, so here's the driveway. That comes from the street. And then here's their home, and they'll enter through the front. And the person who lives here also has access to this backyard. Now, here's the new ADU we built, and the new ADU enters the home from here, and they have alley access here, so we've provided one parallel parking space here. So they'll park here and enter their home here, while the property owner parks here and enters their home at the front. In this scenario, we actually don't need really any of that cross lot access. So we do have a clear pathway here, but they're so close to the corner. This is one of the rare exceptions where any guests that this tenant has will come from the corner and then down the alley, and they'll enter here. So by creating two distinctly separate formal entries, which is where you enter the home as a guest, and informal entries, which is where you park and then enter the home as a homeowner, there's no overlap here. They have complete privacy. Now, you may say, well, what about this backyard? Isn't this ADU looking down at the backyard, creating less privacy for the homeowner in the backyard? Well, that was one of the concerns we took into consideration as we went through the design phase. So I want to see if I have a good image here which shows you how much privacy they would have in the backyard. So this is maybe the best photo I have to show this, but you see we've lifted the windows here above eye line. So the backyard is kind of down here, and the tenants in this unit are not tall enough. They're just like their standard height, but you'd have to be like 7 feet tall to get your eyes up here and then see down into the backyard. So by lifting the windows in the area where we do not want the view, we're able to establish that privacy. These windows look towards the alley, so there's plenty of privacy in that direction. And then here we have a balcony, which is on the front of the house. You can kind of see here. So they do have a view towards the driveway, and this is just an AI turf. The driveway was not completed when the photos were taken, but there is a driveway here. So the only like conflict of privacy here is if the tenants up here are looking down at the driveway, which is really kind of a non-issue. There's also a garage here, so the homeowner has access to the garage, and when they enter the garage, they exit back towards their backyard, and then they can enter through the back of their house right over here, back through that like exterior space. We even took this one step further, and on the ground floor of this 2-story ADU, there's a second bedroom, and that bedroom was designed to be potentially rented by the tenants, but also have the flexibility to be used as a home office space by the homeowner. So we've kind of set up this floor plan where that one room on the ground floor could be used either way. So I guess that's a good example. This is the window of that office space, and again, it's above eye level. So even if you're a tenant renting that office space, you do not have a line of sight into the backyard. So maybe that's a good example of how to establish privacy. Here's that parking space through having non-conflicting points of access for the home.
I agree. I think that's a very solid example. Now, obviously, people might be hesitant to get into this sort of a situation out of fear that they might be locked into it forever. So they're always going to have their in laws on their lot, for example. How can you design these multi generational units so that in the short to medium term, of course, you can have different family members and maybe even close friends live on the lot, but then long term, in order to future proof the investment, you could set it up so that these separate structures could be used in a variety of different ways.
That's kind of the beauty of the use of the ADU. And I think a lot of people don't realize this because they think about it in kind of like a black and white scenario. But let's say I had my parents move into the ADU in my backyard because, they didn't save for retirement. So now they need a place to live. So we build the ADU, my parents move in there. Now, later on in life, maybe I have kids. My parents are no longer in the ADU, and now my kids need to go to college. They're going to stay local, but that dormitory is very expensive. So now my kids can move into this ADU. And let's say, my kids were to go to an out of state school and commuting was not an option. Well, now that ADU can become a rental unit and I can rent it and monetize it. So right there, I've already had three different huge uses for that ADU. And then let's say now I'm retired and the ADU is smaller than my house and I want to downsize my lifestyle. Well, now I can move into the ADU and I could rent the home because my house would be set up larger and I could command more rent. So there's another use. And let's say my retirement plan kicks in and I have lots of extra income. Well, now I can keep both for my use. And the ADU could become a guest house for when guests come in and they could start to use that and stay over so they don't have to stay inside my house. Or maybe partially retired and that ADU can now become a home office or maybe a home gym or maybe a home studio because I want to invest some time into my guitar playing. So I think I've just rattled off like over a half dozen key uses for an ADU where I think a lot of people think the ADU is really just for one thing.
Yeah, there's multiple ways to set it up. One quick thing I think we should address though, what exactly are the current regulations in regards to Airbnb style vacation rentals? I believe it's pretty regulated, so just in case someone is thinking about having one of these units be an Airbnb, what's the feasibility of that right now?
So you can't rent these for short term, which is, I think, under 30 days or 30 days or less, one of the other. So that's considered short term rental. They're not available for short term rental unless you get an Airbnb license. The way the city set up the Airbnb license, they said there was going to be a maximum cap of Airbnbs, which was going to be 1% of housing. And the Airbnbs were going to pay fees. And these Airbnb licenses they're still easy to get in most communities because the city overestimated the amount of people who would be Airbnb being their units. There was just another policy that ran past city council where they were going to charge an additional $1,000 per bedroom per ADU to increase more fees on ADUs to supplement the difference of the amount of Airbnbs that are actually rented versus the ones the city expected to be rented. And I think that was shot down. That would have basically put a lot of Airbnbs out of business. You can rent your ADU out as a midterm rental. So that works good for a nanny. And actually, that's another great use for an Airbnb. You can put a nanny in there. I have another client who wants to put a caregiver in there because they're getting to that point of life where they're going to need home care so that the caregiver can live right on site in the Airbnb. But this would be a good midterm rental or long-term rental solution. But it probably doesn't make sense as a short-term Airbnb rental solution with the current setup that the city has established for fees for short-term rentals.
Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to make it as difficult as possible to have an Airbnb.
Yeah.
Last two questions here. First, is there any common mistakes or pitfalls you see clients getting in as they start to take on these multi-generational living type development projects? Is there any common mistake you think they should be aware of to avoid replicating?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's probably a lot of things that I would do as an architect that I notice that some of my clients are less concerned about. And, I always wonder how these things affect them after the home is already built. So, if you're going to build a duplex structure to support your family or your friends, there are minimum requirements for fire rating, which is pretty simple to achieve. You need a 1 hour fire rating. And there's also minimum sound transmission class and impact isolation class levels. So if I was to build a duplex where one unit was over the other unit, that floor has to meet certain sound requirements so that if I drop something on the floor, you don't hear it below in the apartment. Like you live in an apartment complex right now, right?
I do, but I'm on the top floor, so
Uh-huh.
that's helpful for soundproofing, you know?
Do you know the tenants below you?
No, I don't really hear much, honestly.
The
Fortunately.
sound the sound usually goes the other way because if you have on like hard-soled shoes or if you have a friend over that has high heels on, that sound is usually transmitting. And also we hear a lot of like the tenant above us has not above me, but my clients tell me the tenant above them has a dog, and the dog is running across, they get zoomies in the apartment, they run across and you hear that. Or they have kids and the kids are running around and that sound
Yeah.
transmits down.
No. I had my one neighbor had like a crying baby, which was a disaster, as you could
Yeah.
imagine. The high pitched just goes right through the walls. But no, I was honestly, I probably make the most noise out of anyone. You'll find this funny. Yesterday, I was blasting in the middle of the afternoon the Guns N' Roses song right next door to Hell, and I thought it was pretty ironic. But back to the soundproofing, what are some things, or just in general, the common pitfalls people need to know about?
Yeah, so the code establishes minimum sound transmission, but you can always go beyond that. And oftentimes it doesn't take too much more money to go beyond that. But if you choose not to do this when you're building the home, it's almost impossible to like retrofit this later. One thing I would say is you want to make sure that your floor, if you're on top of another unit, or your wall, if you're adjacent, like horizontally to another unit, are built at probably a higher level than the code would allow because the code establishes a minimum requirement. And that's for sound transmission. And then there's another requirement for impact isolation. That only kicks in on a floor where you're above another unit. So that covers like, your high heels, your dog, your kids. If you ever drop like some silverware on the floor, the tenant below you is hearing that. Impact isolation is actually harder to achieve, but same thing as sound transmission. You can go above and beyond. I would say that would be one thing that I would certainly consider. And the other thing, this is something that comes up quite a bit. I always recommend a detached ADU whenever possible because just staying on the same subject of sound transmission, if you have 6 feet between your structures, that's great sound isolation. So I know I have some clients that are saying, hey, I want it attached. My recommendation, as long as space allows, always do this detached.
Yeah, I agree with that. But what would be the key pricing considerations people would need to think about? So, if possible, imagine same structure, attached, detached. What's the price difference?
Detached actually is potentially less expensive. There's less issues. Once you start working around an existing home and like doing a remodel or an addition, as soon as you open up the wall or the walls or the ceiling or the floor, you're going to find issues and then you have to marry a new construction standard with whatever is there. So you're maybe working with like a home that was built in the 20s. Things are going to just be completely different. So every time you're going to do an attached structure, you open yourself up to the risk of what is actually happening in that existing structure. And a lot of times you may not want to know what is inside those walls. So I would say a detached structure, even though you're going to pay for probably one extra wall because you're not sharing the wall, I think the detached structure would be probably more cost effective. And I think a contractor would be more comfortable giving you a quote for something that's detached rather than giving you a quote for something that's attached. In fact, we work with contractors that will only do detached and they don't want to do attached structures. But now to your point, one common attached structure is the garage conversion. If you have an attached garage, this is usually your lowest price point to get a unit built for as an ADU or a JADU. If you can convert that garage, you already got, 4 walls and a roof and a floor. So that's your lowest price point. So in that scenario, I would probably invest extra money into soundproofing that garage.
Yeah, I'd say the soundproofing is the one thing you would want to splurge on. because it's the type of thing where if you don't, you're going to probably regret it later. So,
Hmm.
last question here. Say someone is interested in this type of a project. It doesn't even need to be multi generational necessarily. It could just be that they want to start building multiple units on their lot for all the benefits we've discussed. What would they need to research, would you say, or just think about before setting up a consultation with an architect such as yourself?
Well, I think the first thing they should do is really think about this at a high level. Can you live, if you had the privacy, but how close can you live to your family and friends? I've had some good friends that I would not probably be able to live that close to. I have some family members that I probably would not be able to live that close to. So you have to really consider if this is the right solution for you. You may be helping out a family or a friend, but you also could be seriously compromising your own lifestyle. So huge benefit to them, possible downscaling of your lifestyle for you. So you have to make sure you're comfortable with that. In terms of like planning for like the whole project, I think that's something that I can help people with. So the first thing I would do is reach out to an architect and go through all of the considerations that come with something like this. Like, let me give you an example. I do consultations for potential clients all the time. One of the first things that I like to look at is, can the existing utilities support the new project, whether that's an ADU, JADU, two ADUs. Can the existing utilities support that? Most of the time they can, but if you're talking about two ADUs, if you're talking about, adding 3 bathrooms, 4 bathrooms, at some point your existing water meter is not going to be able to support this, and you're going to end up with about a $50,000 utility upgrade. You need to know about these things up front, especially if you're on a limited budget. You also want to get a good understanding of all of the soft costs. So you want to know generally what fees you're going to pay and how much those fees are. So if I was to tell you, okay, the building permit's going to cost $15,000, or maybe you're calling the DSD and they're saying, yeah, it's going to be about $15,000, and they kind of ballpark their permits on their website. So you may be going into this thing thinking you're going to pay $15,000 for a permit, but you don't know you're going to pay $4,800 for a sewer and water fee, and you don't know you're going to pay $5.17 for school fees, et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard to kind of like itemize all of these fees. And then, to make it even more difficult, the city has switched to this dynamic pricing, which we're still trying to figure out how this is all working. And you're going to pay these fees at the time you get the permit. So all of the fees will be higher by the time you're ready to permit. The city increased their fees 4 times last year. So they're going to continue to increase their fees. And if you start the project now and you end up issuing the permit a year from now, there's a good chance they will be increased 4 times by the time you're ready to go. So you also have to have a little bit of a contingency. Okay, just to answer your question, reach out to an architect like myself. I'm always available for consultations. We'll go through the procedures. I can give you a ballpark estimate of my fees and the engineer's fees that are going to be. Generally, we need a structural engineer. Sometimes we need a civil engineer. Sometimes we need an MEP engineer. Get a good understanding of the real prices that you're going to pay. Get a good understanding of how much the construction is going to cost. Understand the time frames and what that's going to mean. If I have to move out of my house so we can build a second story addition for you, there's a huge cost that comes with my living condition for that period of the project. And then lastly, I would say understand the process that you're buying as part of those fees from the architect. So in our process, we're going to have 3 to 4 meetings generally, depending on what's right for the project, and that's what's included in the fixed fees that we're offering. If you do a discretionary permit, those are going to be additional fees. If you have an HOA, that's probably going to result in additional fees. So your first step is really to reach out to an architect and have this discussion.
Yeah, it's not something you can wing. Let's put it that way, for sure. It's not something you can
No.
improvise your way through.
No, if you were to live in a very low cost area where permits were easy to achieve and construction was reasonable and you're handy, like you could probably wing this and do it as a owner builder and maybe even do a little bit of the work yourself and reduce the fees. But in California, it's like the big leagues here. It's not easy to get a permit. Construction cost is expensive, labor is expensive, material is expensive, land is expensive. Basically everything's expensive. So you really want to have your ducks in a row.
Totally. And based on everything you mentioned there, we've made videos on that in the past. So I will link as many helpful resources as I can if people want to go a bit deeper into the different subtopics that we mentioned here today, because that would be a great starting point for sure if they're researching a potential project. But anyway, Sean, whether they're looking to schedule a consultation in hopes of developing a full scale, full scope type of a project, or maybe they just need a couple hours of assistance and help in the research phase, what are some different ways they can get in touch with you and your studio directly?
Well, go to 1070architecture.com. There's a section there where you can book an appointment for a consultation. If you already own a property, I also have appointments for on-demand architectural consultations. If you need a little bit more advice on which property to buy or where to consider buying, you could also check out our portfolio right on the website, but you can also go to our Instagram, which is at 1070architecture. And make sure you like our portfolio before you reach out to us because we're generally designing projects in that similar style. And I'd be happy to help you with your project if you're considering doing anything like this.